Jake Morrison stood at the back of the training room, watching other cadets practice their combat moves. The sounds of metal hitting metal filled the air as students from different planets worked on their fighting skills. Jake felt out of place. Here, just like he did every day at the Galactic Defense Academy on Station Omega-7. The academy was huge, with tall metal walls and bright lights that never went off. Students from many different worlds came here to learn how to fight in space. Wars. There were humans like Jake, but also tall blue aliens called Zephyrians who moved like dancers when they fought. There were metal beings called constructs who never got tired and always hit their targets. Every species seemed to be good at something that Jake was not. Jake was 20 years old and had dreamed of being a space soldier since he was a child. His father had been a cargo ship pilot, and his mother worked in the spaceports back on Earth. They were proud when Jake got accepted to the academy, but now he wondered if he belonged here at all. Commander Helen Barnes walked between the training pairs, her boots making loud sounds on the metal floor. She was a tough woman with gray hair pulled back tight and scars on her hands from old battles. When she looked at Jake, her face always showed disappointment. "Morrison, get over here," she called out in her sharp voice. The other students stopped what they were doing to watch. Jake felt his face get hot as he walked to the center of the room. "Show us the disarming move we learned yesterday," Commander Barnes said, crossing her arms. A Zephyrian student named Velcor stepped forward with a practice weapon. He was tall and thin with purple skin and moved like water flowing. Jake took his position and tried to remember the steps. When Velcor attacked, Jake was supposed to grab the weapon and twist it away. But when the moment came, Jake hesitated. He did not want to hurt Velcor even in practice. This moment of waiting was all Velcor needed to keep his weapon and pointed at Jake's chest. "Dead," Commander Barnes said with disgust. "In a real fight, you would be dead right now, Morrison. Your soft heart will get your whole team killed." The other students laughed quietly among themselves. Jake heard some of them whisper soft Terran in their own languages, but he knew what they meant. It was not the first time he had failed in front of everyone. Jake's problem was that he always looked for ways to solve fights without hurting people. When they did war games in spaceships, other students would attack enemy ships right away. Jake would try to talk to them first or find ways to make them leave without fighting. His teachers called this weakness, but Jake thought there had to be better ways than just shooting everything. After the training session ended, Jake walked to the food hall alone. The big room was full of students from different worlds eating their meals. Humans sat with humans, Zephyrians sat with their own kind, and the constructs recharged at special tables built for them. Jake got his food and found an empty table in the corner. As he ate, he could hear other students talking about him. Two human cadets named Pete Collins and Lisa Carter were sitting nearby with some Zephyrian friends. Pete was tall with brown hair and always scored high in combat tests. Lisa was smart and good at flying spaceships. "Did you see Morrison freeze up again today?" Pete said, not caring if Jake could hear him. "I don't know why they keep him here. He's going to get us all killed when we go on real missions." Lisa nodded and said, "My dad fought in the border wars. He says soldiers who can't pull the trigger don't belong in the army. Maybe Morrison should go home and be a teacher or something safe like that." Jake tried to ignore them, but their words hurt. He had worked so hard to get here, studying for years and passing all the tests. But every day made him feel more like he did not belong with these future warriors. After dinner, Jake went to his small room. It had a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out into space. He could see stars everywhere, tiny lights in the endless black. Somewhere out there were his parents on Earth, probably wondering how their son was doing at the famous academy. Jake pulled out his data pad and started writing a message home, but he could not think of what to say. How could he tell them that he was failing? How could he explain that he was different from the other students in ways that seemed to matter here? He put the data pad away and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow there would be more training, more tests, and more chances to disappoint his teachers and classmates. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind kept thinking about all the ways he did not fit in. The worst part was that Jake still believed there were Better ways to solve problems than just fighting. He had read about great leaders from Earth's history who won wars through smart thinking and making peace with enemies. But here at the academy, those ideas seemed old and useless. In the quiet of his room, Jake made a decision. He would try harder. To be like the other students. Maybe if he could learn to fight without thinking so much, he would finally belong somewhere. He did not know that very soon. Everything would change in ways he could never imagine. Outside his window, the stars continued to shine in the dark, waiting for a young man who was different to discover that being different might be exactly what the galaxy needed. The alarm bells rang through Station Omega 7 early in the morning, waking all the cadets from their sleep. Jake sat up in his bed, confused and worried. The bells only rang when something very important was happening. He quickly put on his uniform and ran to the main meeting hall with all the other students. Commander Barnes stood at the front of the room, but she was not alone. Behind her were three of the most frightening beings Jake had ever seen. They were nearly 8 feet tall with dark shell-like skin that looked harder than metal. Their hands ended in sharp claws that could probably cut through steel, and their eyes glowed with a strange yellow light. Jake knew what they were even before Commander Barnes spoke. These were Kalari, the most famous hunters in the galaxy. Every child who grew up among the stars had heard stories about them. They were the only species that had never lost a war, never been conquered, and never backed down from any fight. "Cadets," Commander Barnes said, her voice more serious than Jake had ever heard it. "We have been honored with a visit from the Kalari Empire. They are here on official business that concerns the safety of our galaxy." The tallest of the three? Kalari stepped forward. His shell was covered in scars from old battles, and one of his eyes was milky white from some ancient wound. When he spoke, his voice was deep and made the room shake a little. "I am Vectar, Hunt Leader of the Bone. Crusher Pack," he said. "We have come because our enemies threaten all life in this galaxy. The Void Seekers have begun their attacks on the outer worlds. They destroy everything they touch and leave nothing behind." Jake had heard whispers about the Void Seekers in the news reports. They were mysterious aliens who attacked colonies, and then disappeared like ghosts. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. Every military force that tried to fight them had failed, Vectar continued, speaking in his rumbling voice. "The Kalari Council has decided to create a special hunting pack to track down these Void Seekers. We will choose warriors from this academy to join our hunt. For 1 week, we will watch you and test you. Only the strongest and smartest will be selected." The room fell completely quiet. Jake could hear his own heart beating. Being chosen by the Kalari was the greatest honor any warrior could receive. It was also very dangerous. Because Kalari hunts usually ended with most of the hunters dying, Commander Barnes dismissed the cadets to their regular training, but everything felt different now. The Kalari followed them to the practice rooms and watched everything with their glowing eyes. They did not speak or move much, but Jake could feel them studying every student during combat practice. Pete Collins and Lisa Carter worked extra hard to impress the visitors. Pete fought 3 opponents at once and won every time. Lisa flew a practice ship through an obstacle course faster than anyone had ever done before. The Zephyrian students moved like lightning, and the constructs hit every target perfectly. Jake did his usual training, trying not to make any big mistakes. He knew the Kalari would never choose someone like him, so he just focused on learning what he could. But every time he looked up, he caught one of the aliens watching him with those strange yellow eyes. During lunch, the students talked about nothing but the Kalari. Everyone wanted to know what the selection tests would be like. Some said the Kalari would make them fight real wild animals. Others thought they would have to survive alone on a dangerous planet. "Whatever it is, Morrison better stay out of the way," Pete said loudly enough for Jake to hear. "The last thing we need is dead weight when we're trying to impress the galaxy's greatest warriors." Jake ate his food quietly and tried to ignore the comments, but they still hurt. He watched the 3 Kalari sitting at their own table, eating something that looked like raw meat. They barely spoke to each other, but sometimes one would point at a cadet and the others would nod. After lunch came weapons training. Each student had to show their skill with different types of guns and energy. Weapons. Jake was okay with most weapons, but he was not the best at any of them. He preferred to think about how to avoid fights rather than how to win them. The Kalari watched this training more carefully than anything else. Vectar himself stood close to the shooting range, his scarred face showing no emotion as students took their turns. When it was Jake's turn, he could feel the hunt leader's eyes on him like heat from a fire. Jake picked up a standard energy rifle and aimed at the targets. He hit most of them, but not as many as Pete or Lisa or the alien students. When he finished, he expected Vectar to look disappointed and move on to the next student. Instead, the huge Kalari stepped closer. "Human Jake Morrison," Vectar said in his deep voice. "Why do you aim for the body and not the head?" Jake felt nervous with everyone watching, but he answered honestly. "Because a body shot will stop an enemy from fighting, but they might still live. A headshot will definitely kill them. I only want to kill if there is no other choice." Some students laughed at this answer, but Vectar did not. He stared at Jake for a long moment with those glowing eyes, then nodded once and walked away. That evening, Jake went to the observation deck to look at the stars and think. The huge windows showed the endless space around the station, with planets and moons visible in the distance. It was peaceful here. Away from the noise and competition of the training areas, he was surprised when he heard heavy footsteps behind him. Jake turned around and saw Vectar approaching alone. The massive Kalari moved quietly for someone so big, and Jake realized he was seeing a perfect hunter in action. "You come here often, young Terran," Vectar said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, not sure what else to say. "I like to look at the stars and think about things." Vectar came to stand beside him at the window. For several minutes, they both looked out at space without speaking. Finally, the hunt leader spoke again. "What do you think about when you look at the stars?" Jake was quiet for a moment, then decided to be honest. "I think about all the different worlds out there and all the different kinds of people living on them. I wonder if there are ways for everyone to get along without so much fighting." Vectar made a sound that might have been laughter, but Jake was not sure. "You are very different from the other humans here, Jake Morrison. That may be more important than you know." On the third day, Vectar gathered all the cadets in the main training hall. The massive Kalari stood in the center of the room, his scarred face serious as he looked at each student. The other two Kalari warriors flanked him on either side, their yellow eyes glowing in the bright lights. "Today you will face the test of worth," Vectar announced, his deep voice filling the room. "Each of you will enter our hunting grounds alone. You will have 3 days to survive in the most dangerous place in Kalari space. This is not a game or a simulation. The creatures you will face are real, and they will try to kill you." Jake felt his stomach drop. Around him, other cadets looked excited and scared at the same time. This was what they had all been waiting for, but now that it was here, the reality felt overwhelming. Commander Barnes stepped forward. "The holographic chambers have been programmed with a perfect recreation of Kalari Prime's deadliest continent," she explained. "Every plant, animal, and environmental hazard has been recreated exactly. You will have basic survival gear and one weapon of your choice. Everything else depends on your skills and intelligence." Vectar nodded and continued. "On Kalari Prime, only the strongest hunters survive to see their first moon cycle. You will face the same challenges our young warriors have faced for thousands of years. Those who prove themselves worthy will join our pack. Those who fail will return to their regular training." The selection process would work in order of class ranking. Pete Collins, who had the highest combat scores, would go first. Lisa Carter would be second, followed by the top Zephyrian and Construct students. Jake was near the bottom of the list, which meant he would be one of the last to take the test. Pete stepped into the holographic chamber with confidence. He had chosen a plasma rifle as his weapon and carried a pack full of survival supplies. Through the viewing windows, everyone could watch as he materialized in what looked like a thick alien jungle. The trees were massive, with twisted black bark and leaves that seemed to move on their own. Strange sounds echoed through the air. and Jake could see shapes moving in the shadows. Pete immediately took an aggressive approach when a creature that looked like a giant spider with metal legs attacked him. He shot it with his rifle. The blast killed the creature, but the noise attracted other predators. Soon Pete was running through the jungle, fighting one monster after another. For 2 days, Pete fought his way through the dangerous environment. He killed dozens of creatures and found shelter in a cave. When his test ended, he emerged tired, but victorious. The Kalari watched him exit the chamber with mild interest, but their faces showed no emotion. Lisa Carter went next, and she used her intelligence to survive. Instead of fighting everything she met, she studied the creatures and found ways to avoid the most dangerous ones. She built traps and used the environment to her advantage. When she finished her 3 days, she had killed far fewer creatures than Pete, but she had also used much less energy and supplies. One by one, the other cadets took their turns. The Zephyrians used their speed and agility to outrun predators. The constructs calculated the most efficient paths through the dangerous terrain and eliminated threats with mechanical precision. Each student survived in their own way, but none seemed to impress the Kalari very much. Finally, it was Jake's turn. He stood at the entrance to the holographic chamber, his hands shaking slightly. He had chosen a simple energy pistol as his weapon, which made some students laugh. They thought he should have picked something more powerful. "Good luck, Morrison," Pete said, but his tone suggested he did not think Jake would need luck because he would fail quickly. Jake stepped into the chamber, and immediately everything changed. The air was thick and humid, filled with strange smells that made his nose burn. The jungle around him was alive with sounds he had never heard before. Somewhere in the distance, something roared with a voice that shook the ground. Unlike the other students, Jake did not start moving right away. Instead, he found a tall tree and climbed up to get a better view of his surroundings. From high above the jungle floor, he could see the layout of the land and watch how different creatures moved through their territory. Jake spent his first day just observing. He watched a pack of creatures that looked like wolves with 6 legs hunt smaller animals. He saw how they worked together and where they liked to make their dens. He noticed that certain plants seemed to repel some predators while attracting others. Most importantly, he began to understand that this was not just a collection of dangerous animals, but a complete ecosystem where everything was connected. On the second day, Jake started to move through the jungle, but he moved carefully. When he encountered the 6-legged wolf creatures, he did not try to fight them or run away. Instead, he watched their behavior and realized they were protecting their young. He found a way to go around their territory without threatening their babies. When he came across the giant spider creatures that had attacked Pete, Jake noticed something interesting. They only attacked when they felt cornered or when something invaded their webs. By moving slowly and avoiding their web areas, Jake was able to pass by them safely. The most dangerous moment came on the 3rd day when Jake encountered a massive creature called a razor-spined stalker. It was bigger than the other predators, with armor-like skin and claws that could cut through metal. This was the kind of creature that had forced other students to fight for their lives, but Jake did something different. He sat down about 50 feet away from the creature and waited. The stalker noticed him and moved closer, but Jake did not run or reach for his weapon. He just sat still and watched the creature's eyes and body language. After several tense minutes, the stalker seemed to realize that Jake was not a threat. It sniffed the air around him, then settled down nearby. Jake realized that the creature was not naturally aggressive. It was just protecting its territory from anything that seemed dangerous. For the rest of the day, Jake and the stalker existed in the same area without conflict. When smaller predators approached, the stalker's presence kept them away, which actually made Jake safer. In return, Jake shared some of his food supplies with the creature, which seemed to appreciate the gesture. When the 3 days ended, Jake emerged from the chamber looking calm and rested. He had not killed a single creature during his entire test. Instead, he had learned to live alongside them as part of their world. The other cadets stared in amazement. Some thought he had somehow cheated or that the simulation had malfunctioned. How could someone survive the test of worth without fighting anything? But Dektar was watching Jake with a very different expression. The scarred hunt leader stepped forward, his yellow eyes glowing brighter than usual. For the first time since arriving at the station, the massive Kalari looked truly interested in what he had seen. The main hall of Station Omega-7 had never been so quiet. Every cadet, instructor, and station worker had gathered to hear Dektar announce his selections for the special hunting pack. The massive Kalari stood at the front of the room with his two warriors beside him, their yellow eyes scanning the crowd of hopeful faces. Jake stood in the back with the other lower-ranked students, trying to make himself invisible. He knew he had no chance of being chosen after what had happened. In the test of worth, while other cadets had fought bravely against dangerous creatures, he had simply lived peacefully among them. That could not be what the galaxy's greatest hunters were looking for. Pete Collins stood at the front with the other top students, his chest puffed out with confidence. Lisa Carter checked her uniform one more time, making sure she looked perfect for the announcement. The Zephyrian and Construct students waited with their own quiet dignity, certain that at least some of their people would be selected. Commander Barnes called for attention, and the room became completely silent. Even the usual hum of the stations. Machinery seemed to quiet down. Dektar stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the assembled crowd. "The test of worth has been completed," Dektar announced in his deep, rumbling voice. "I have seen how each of you faces danger and death. I have watched how you think, how you fight, and how you survive. Now I will choose those who will join the hunt against the Void Seekers." Jake felt his heart beating fast, even though he knew his name would not be called. Part of him was relieved that he would not have to face the deadly mission ahead, but another part felt disappointed that he had failed once again. "The first warrior I choose for my pack is ... Dektar paused, his glowing eyes moving across the room. Jake Morrison. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake thought he had imagined hearing his name. Then the whispers started, spreading through the crowd like fire. Students turned to stare at him with shock and confusion. Commander Barnes looked like someone had hit her with a heavy object. "That cannot be right," Pete Collins said loudly, forgetting where he was. Morrison did not even fight anything in the test. He just sat around with the animals like some kind of nature lover. Dektar's head turned toward Pete with the speed of a striking snake. His yellow eyes blazed with anger, and his claws extended slightly from his hands. "Are you questioning my judgment, human whelp?" Pete's face went pale and he stepped back quickly. "No, sir, I just thought ... "You thought wrong," Dektar said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "I have been hunting for more years than your species has traveled among the stars. I know a true hunter when I see one." Jake could not move or speak. This had to be some kind of mistake. Why would the legendary hunt leader choose him over all the better students? He felt hundreds of eyes staring at him as Dektar continued speaking. "Jake Morrison, come forward." The Kalari commanded. Jake's legs felt like they were made of water, but somehow he managed to walk through the crowd to the front of the room. Every step felt like it took forever, and he could hear whispers following him. When he reached Dektar, the massive alien towered over him like a living mountain. "Tell me, young Terran," Dektar said, his voice now softer but still commanding. "What did you learn during the test of worth?" Jake's mouth felt dry, but he tried to answer honestly. "I learned that the creatures in the jungle were not just monsters trying to kill everything. They were living beings with families and territories and reasons for what they did. The razor-spined stalker was not evil, it was just protecting its home. When I stopped seeing them as enemies and started seeing them as neighbors, everything changed." Dektar nodded slowly. "And how did this help you survive?" "Instead of fighting them, I learned to live with them," Jake continued, his voice getting stronger. "I watched their patterns and understood their needs. The big predators actually protected me from smaller dangerous creatures because they knew I was not a threat. It was like becoming part of their world instead of trying to conquer it." The room was completely silent now, with everyone listening carefully to Jake's words. Even the Kalari warriors behind Dektar seemed to be paying close attention. Vectar placed one massive clawed hand on Jake's shoulder. Jake expected it to be heavy and frightening, but the touch was surprisingly gentle. "In our language, we have a word that your species does not," the hunt leader said. Kethmoron. It means one who walks between worlds or bridge builder. It describes someone who can find harmony where others see only conflict. The Kalari turned to address the entire room, but his hand remained on Jake's shoulder. "For 1,000 years, my people have been the greatest hunters in the galaxy because we understand one simple truth. The perfect hunter does not destroy his environment, he becomes part of it. We do not conquer our prey, we understand it so completely that we can predict its every move." Jake began to understand what Vectar was saying, but it still seemed impossible that this applied to him. "Most species see hunting as a battle to be won through strength and violence," Vectar continued. "But the greatest hunts are won through wisdom and patience. Jake Morrison showed me something in his test that I have rarely seen in young warriors from any species. He has the heart of a true hunter." The hunt leader reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small container of blue paint. "This is the mark of Kethmoran," he explained as he dipped one claw into the paint. "It has never been given to an outsider before." Vectar carefully drew a symbol on Jake's forehead with the blue paint. It looked like two curved lines that met in the middle, forming something like a bridge. The paint felt cool against Jake's skin, and he could smell something like ocean water and metal. "From this moment forward, Jake Morrison, you are not just a cadet or a student," Vectar announced to the assembled crowd. "You are my hunting brother. You will join my pack not as a follower, but as an equal. Your name will be sung in the halls of Kalari Prime alongside the greatest warriors of our people." Jake felt dizzy with shock and amazement. Everything he had thought about himself, everything others had said about his weaknesses, suddenly looked different. Maybe being unable to kill without thinking was not a weakness after all. Maybe seeing enemies as people with their own reasons was actually a strength, but the biggest surprise was still to come. Vectar turned back to the crowd and announced his other selections. Pete Collins was chosen along with Lisa Carter and 2 of the alien students. But when Vectar explained why he had chosen each one, it became clear that Jake was not just another member of the team. "Jake Morrison will be my second in command," Vectar said, his words echoing through the silent hall. "In the hunt against the Void Seekers, we will need more than weapons and courage. We will need someone who can think like our enemies and find the path to victory that others cannot see." As the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, Jake stood in amazement with the blue symbol still wet on his forehead. His life had just changed in ways he could never have imagined, and the real adventure was only beginning. The Kalari warship Bone Crusher was unlike any vessel Jake had ever seen. The ship was massive and dark, built from some kind of metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols covered the hull, and the entire vessel felt alive somehow, as if it were a giant predator swimming through space. Jake walked through the corridors beside Vectar, still amazed that he was really here. 3 weeks had passed since the selection ceremony, and he had spent that time learning Kalari customs and preparing for the mission ahead. The blue symbol on his forehead had been made permanent with special ink that would never fade, marking him forever as a brother to the galaxy's greatest hunters. The other selected cadets were also aboard the ship, but they looked at Jake with a mixture of respect and confusion. Pete Collins had been quiet since learning that Jake would be second in command of the mission. Lisa Carter tried to be friendly, but Jake could tell she was still puzzled by Vectar's choice. "The Void Seekers have struck again," Vectar said, as they walked toward the command center. "They destroyed the mining colony on Zarian 7 yesterday. 3,000 beings dead and nothing left behind but empty space." Jake had been studying everything the military knew about the Void Seekers during the journey. They were unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. Their ships could become invisible and pass through solid matter like ghosts. They attacked without warning, destroyed everything in their path, and then disappeared completely. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. The command center of the Bone Crusher, was dark and filled with glowing displays showing star maps and sensor readings. Other Kalari warriors worked at various stations, their clawed hands moving over controls with practiced skill. When Vector entered, they all turned and made a gesture of respect. "Show them the target area," Vector commanded, the main display, lit up with an image of a region of space called the Nebula Mortis. It was a vast cloud of gas and energy that made sensors useless and navigation nearly impossible. Most species avoided the area completely because ships that entered it were never seen again. "Our scouts have tracked the Void Seekers to this nebula," Vector explained. "They have built some kind of base inside where our ships cannot find them. Every military force that has tried to attack them there has been destroyed." Jake studied the swirling patterns of the nebula on the screen. Something about the way the energy moved reminded him of the creatures he had observed during his test. There were patterns hidden in what looked like random chaos. "What do we know about their attack methods?" Jake asked, one of the Kalari warriors. An older female named Shekra stepped forward. "They phase in and out of normal space at will," she said. "Our weapons cannot touch them when they are in their ghost form, but they can still attack us. They seem to know exactly when and where to strike for maximum damage." Jake nodded, thinking about what he had learned. "Have we considered that their phasing ability might follow patterns like the tides on an ocean planet or the migration routes of animals?" The Kalari warriors looked at each other with interest. This was a new way of thinking about the problem. P. Collins, who was standing nearby, looked skeptical. "They're aliens using advanced technology, not animals," Pete said. "We should be focusing on building better weapons to fight them." Vector's eyes flashed with something that might have been amusement. "Jake Morrison, explain your thinking to the pack." Jake moved closer to the display showing the nebula. "Every species in the galaxy follows patterns even when they think they are acting randomly. The Void Seekers attack certain types of targets at certain times. They retreat to specific areas when threatened. They even seem to have territorial behaviors, avoiding some regions while claiming others." As Jake spoke, he began to see connections he had not noticed before. What if they are not just using technology to phase in and out of our reality? What if that ability is natural to them, like breathing is to us? And if it is natural, then it probably follows biological patterns that we can predict. Shekra activated more displays, showing the locations and times of Void Seeker attacks over the past year. As the data appeared, Jake began to see what he was looking for. "Look at the timing," he said, pointing to different attacks. "They strike most often during certain cosmic events, when the energy fields between dimensions are weakest. And see how they always retreat toward areas with high electromagnetic activity. That is not random, that is instinctive behavior." Vector was watching Jake with growing approval. "Continue, hunting brother. If we think of them as creatures instead of just enemies with weapons, we can predict their movements," Jake explained, his excitement growing. "They are not invaders trying to conquer territory. They are more like a hive species protecting their nesting area. The attacks on colonies are not conquest. They are pest control from their perspective." The implications of this realization spread through the command center like ripples in water. If Jake was right, then every previous military strategy had been wrong. The Void Seekers could not be defeated through superior firepower because they were not trying to win a war, they were trying to clear unwanted life forms from what they considered their space. "So how do we hunt creatures that can become ghosts?" Pete asked, finally beginning to understand Jake's approach. Jake smiled, feeling more confident than he had ever felt in his life. "The same way Kalari hunters have always hunted the most. Dangerous prey. We learn their patterns, we understand their needs, and we find the moment when they are most vulnerable." Over the next several hours, Jake worked with the Kalari warriors to develop a new strategy. Instead of trying to attack the Void Seekers directly, they would study their behavior patterns and predict when and where they would be forced to become solid again. The plan was risky and unlike anything that had been tried before. They would enter the Nebula Mortis during a specific cosmic alignment when the dimensional barriers would be thickest. At that time, the Void Seekers would not be able to phase shift as easily, making them vulnerable to conventional weapons. But the most important part of the plan was Jake's idea to approach them not as conquerors, but as fellow predators marking territory. Instead of a massive battle fleet, they would use a small hunting pack that could move quickly and strike precisely. "This is either the most brilliant strategy I have ever heard," Vector said when the planning was complete, "or the most foolish. We will learn which one when we enter the nebula tomorrow." As Jake prepared for sleep in his quarters that night, he thought about how much his life had changed. A few months ago, he had been the Academy's greatest failure. Now he was helping to plan a mission that could save the entire galaxy. The blue symbol on his forehead caught his reflection in the mirror, reminding him of what Thektar had said about being a bridge between worlds. Tomorrow, he would discover if his strange way of thinking could really make a difference when the stakes could not be higher. Outside his window, the nebula mortis swirled with dangerous beauty, hiding secrets that would soon be revealed. Jake closed his eyes and tried to rest, knowing that the greatest hunt of his life would begin with the rising of the ship's artificial sun.